I refuse to invite my aunts to my wedding because of their spoiled children. My family has boycotted me and doesn't invite me to family meetings. I, 26F, have been in a relationship with my partner, 27F, for 5 years, and we are planning to tie the knot next year. The wedding preparations have been going smoothly until now. To give some context, there is a significant age gap among the grandchildren on my mother's side, as my dad is an only child. My mother had me in her mid-20s, and my two aunts waited until their late 30s to have children. As a result, I've always felt more like an additional aunt to many of my cousins, as there are about 4 of them, all girls, aged between 6 and 10, except for my cousin Kate, 25F, who is the daughter of my mother's older brother. While I love my family dearly, my aunts have always been the kind of parents who find it difficult to say no to their precious children. This has led to their kids being rather spoiled. Over the past decade, not a single family event has gone by without being disrupted in some way by a child throwing a tantrum over something trivial. In the last year alone, we've witnessed tantrums over not wanting to leave a party when it was closing, not having the right flavor of strawberry ice cream at our grandfather's 85th birthday celebration, or simply receiving hair bows that didn't match each other. Frankly, the reasons for these tantrums seem so absurd that they feel made up. These outbursts are quite severe, involving full-blown screaming, pounding the floor, and enough tears to fill a field until their mothers give in to their demands. The husbands are rather passive and tend to let their wives handle the kids. It took a long time for me to bring my partner to any of our family events because I knew these tantrums were inevitable and I didn't want to scare her away. I work with kids, so I know that this behavior is beyond normal and that the lack of discipline is to blame. However, I've never been in a position to address it because in my family, the prevailing belief is that if you don't have kids, your opinion on how to raise them doesn't count. As the kids have grown older, the situation has only worsened. Now, onto the wedding planning. We have decided against having a large wedding because neither of us desires it. We want only our close family members and friends present, totaling just over 100 people. My partner's family doesn't have any kids under 16, and when we discussed the idea of a child-free wedding, it was clear that my partner liked the idea of no one under 16. To be honest, I was happy with it too, as our dogs were going to fill the roles of ring bearer and flower girl anyway, and we both knew there was going to be at least one tantrum. Neither of us wanted to subject our friends and her family to those. My parents and grandparents agreed that it would be nice to have no kids for a change, and with that decision, we sent the invitations out. Not long after the invitations went out, we attended my cousin Kate's wedding. She grew up 3 hours away and hasn't really turned up to any family events in the last decade, but her mother made her invite everyone to show off as there were over 400 people. You could tell a lot of money was put into the event, and it was lovely, but personally, I wouldn't have liked it for my day. Her new husband had a niece and nephew, so they did the flower girl and ring bearer roles. And yes, there were tantrums thrown when that news broke. It only took 5 minutes into the wedding for a tantrum to happen because one of the kids wanted to sit at the front and not a few pews back. My partner has gotten into the habit after 4 years of these events of keeping track of the tantrums on her notes app, and she counted 3 in the church alone. It only got worse as it was raining after, and the kids didn't want to wear jackets to get to the car, and many tears happened. The meal wasn't much better, but thankfully, we were at the head table with my grandparents away from it. However, you could not hear the whining and shouting occasionally throughout the meal. Things got bad when, at some point before dessert, 2 of the kids came up to me and asked why they were not invited to my wedding as they had been for Kate's. A bit stunned, I just replied that the place we were having it was only for adults. That obviously was the wrong answer because almost immediately another tantrum erupted about how apparently their parents had promised them they would be the flower girls at my wedding. Fortunately, due to their small size for their age, it was relatively easy to relocate the children away from the head table, which was situated on a stage and away from the prying eyes of the guests. Meanwhile, my parents found themselves approached by my aunts, who were inquiring as to why their children had not received an invitation. My parents reiterated the same explanation I had given, but this failed to satisfy them. At that moment, my grandfather and I found ourselves with 2 of their wailing children. In a moment of frustration, I unexpectedly blurted out, "Can't you understand why I might not want to have your children at my wedding? Please, let's not discuss this now. It's not the right time, and people are already staring at us." With that, I left the scene. While most of my family members agreed with my sentiments, my aunts have now declared that they will not attend the wedding until I apologize to them and their children and extend an invitation. Some family members believe that it was not the appropriate time to voice my thoughts and suggest that I apologize simply to maintain peace. However, I am hesitant to do so as I do not believe my words were particularly offensive, especially considering what I later learned about the comments made by the groom's family after Kate's wedding. Update: I had made plans to spend Christmas with my partner and in-laws, who live over an hour away, and then celebrate Boxing Day back at home with my parents and grandparents. However, to my surprise, my mother contacted me late on Christmas Day to inform me that the Boxing Day celebrations were called off after a disastrous Christmas meal with the family, which at the last minute included the aunts and their children. Apparently, they had decided to show up at my great-grandmother's house for Christmas and confront me about the events at my cousin Kate's wedding. They were expecting me to apologize for calling out their kids' behavior. Typically, they do their own thing at Christmas and often visit their in-laws. It's worth mentioning that they are married to brothers, who are two of the most peculiar men I've ever met, but that's a story for another time. They seem to believe that if my 99-year-old great-grandmother, my mother's mom, was present, I wouldn't refuse their demands. However, they failed to consider the possibility that I might not be there. According to my father, their expressions when they realized their plan had backfired were quite amusing. Their children were causing chaos, running rampant, and screaming their heads off. One even threw a temper tantrum because there were no presents for them under the tree. The aunts arrived in the middle of the Christmas meal, several hours after all the presents had been opened, but the child couldn't comprehend that, according to my aunt. At one point, my great-grandmother got so annoyed at the screaming that she yanked her hearing aids out. No one in the family had thought to inform her about what had happened at Kate's wedding. It was one of those situations where everyone assumed someone else had filled her in, so she was a bit confused at first. She was aware that the wedding was intended to be child-free, so she couldn't comprehend why they were making such a fuss about it and insisted that they should just move past it. She expressed her desire to enjoy what would likely be the last wedding she would ever attend in peace, away from screaming children. Our family has a very dark sense of humor. Given this and what I had previously mentioned, I believe most of my family have simply had enough of their outrageous excuses. After Great-Granny made this statement, they continued to complain about their poor angels, but they didn't have much ground to stand on. Soon after they began speaking, the kids got into my grandmother's homemade baked Alaska and ruined the dessert for everyone. Apparently, my grandfather lost his patience and told them to leave and let us enjoy one family event in peace. He also warned them that they needed to address their children's behavior if they ever wanted to be invited to another family event, as their conduct was out of line and would only lead to further problems as they got older. This man had served for over 10 years in the Army and another 25 years as a police officer, and he is quite intimidating when he loses his temper, so understandably they left as quickly as possible. Even my great-grandmother opened one of her fancy bottles of whiskey to celebrate. My grandfather had been one of those who didn't want to disinvite them and preferred to keep the peace. He's financially contributing to the wedding, but when I returned home yesterday, he gave me full permission to rescind their invitations. After initially considering issuing a warning to my aunt regarding her children attending the wedding, I ultimately decided to rescind their invitations. Following an urgent family meeting on Boxing Day, we reached the decision to revoke their invitations and repurpose the budget allocated for their meals by purchasing jewelry for myself, my mom, grandmother, and great-grandmother as a keepsake. My parents and partner fully support this decision. Fortunately, the venue is owned by my soon-to-be in-laws, who include security in the cost due to past experiences with unruly family members at events. The venue is managed by my future brother-in-law, giving us complete control over the guest list for the wedding. My maid of honor, also a close friend, has volunteered to handle any potential disruptions. In the event that my aunt or her children show up uninvited, she has devised a plan to accidentally spill wine or have my dogs create a distraction. She is a drama teacher and confident in her ability to make it appear as an authentic accident. Regarding the guilt-tripping tactics employed by my aunt and her children, I was aware of their intentions. This is not the first time they have resorted to such tactics. For instance, when one of the children had their Holy Communion, it coincided with the time my partner and I adopted our 2 dogs. Although we had not planned on taking both dogs, we could not bear to separate them and welcome them both into our home. Due to my work commitments on Saturday mornings, I was unable to attend the church service for the communion. I made it clear in advance that I wouldn't be able to make it, ensuring that everyone knew by personally delivering a card with money and a small gift for the child the day before. However, at the meal later on, the child's sister approached me during the event and questioned why I hadn't shown up at the church in front of everyone, also inquiring about the puppy they believed I was gifting them. It turns out my aunt had misled them into thinking that one of my puppies was meant for them. This led to a scene, and the puppy they did receive ended up living with my in-laws after just a week. This kind of behavior hadn't been directed at me for a while, so I was caught off guard more than anything else. Soon after this incident, Kate's mother-in-law sent us a round of drinks to help with our growing headaches and expressed amazement at how we deal with such situations. There were jokes within the bridal party about when the next tantrum might occur. My partner correctly predicted one just before the speeches, and we even placed bets on what might trigger the next outburst based on my partner's 4 years of observations. Kate's in-laws also share our family's dark humor, and later in the evening, we were joking about which would be worse, the tantrums during the teenage years or all those hormonal changes. Admittedly, it may not have been the most mature way to handle things, but at that point, we were too inebriated and frustrated to care. Very intriguing update. Hello everyone. I've received numerous requests in the comments and direct messages to provide an explanation about the unusual behavior of my aunt's husbands and to give a potential update. This might be a lengthy explanation as I've had many questions, and there's been quite a chaotic development. Let's dive into it. Firstly, the husbands are not twins, but I find it challenging to tell them apart. They share the same height, hairstyle, similar clothing choices, and even work in the same profession. The only distinguishing feature is that one of them has a faded tattoo of a bird on his eyebrow. I have no idea why. Interestingly, my two aunts hardly resemble each other, as one looks exactly like my grandmother and the other like my grandfather. It's only when they are seen with my mom or uncle that you can see the resemblance, as they both look like a combination of my grandparents. Additionally, they are more than 10 years younger than my aunts. While I don't have anything against age gap relationships in general, it's definitely strange to see your aunt married to a guy who's only about 8 years older than you, and they both look young for their ages. Now onto the peculiar stuff. Both of them have very odd views about women, especially those younger than them. They seem to hold archaic, almost 1950s notions about women and how they should behave, particularly concerning their attire. They disapprove of women, especially those under 50, wearing pants, and one of them has even expressed discomfort at the sight of women in pants directly to my face. It's not a joke. From personal experience, I've noticed that they treat me very differently depending on whether I'm wearing a dress or pants. They can't even look me in the eye if I'm wearing pants. While I understand that such beliefs may exist in some cultures and religions, it feels odd to encounter this in 2024 Canada within an Irish family. Unfortunately, these sexist ideas don't end there. On multiple occasions, they have mentioned their belief that women shouldn't pursue certain careers because the man should always end up being the breadwinner, as it's the father's primary job to provide for the family. It's bizarre to write that two grown men were appalled that a woman earned more than they did. When my mother inadvertently revealed that my partner's job as a corporate lawyer meant she earned more than both of them, they genuinely looked horrified. There are also other strange things about them, such as how they refuse to drive a red car for reasons I'm not entirely sure of, something to do with Satan, and one of them apparently hates green vegetables. Moreover, their interactions with people are just really odd. It's difficult to put into words, but it's like that person we all have in our lives who gives us an uncomfortable feeling every time we interact with them, and they have that in spades. Apart from their stable jobs, I don't know what my aunts see in them. When I first met them, one of them used to wear glasses frames without any glass where the prescription lenses would be. Fortunately, he has stopped doing that. Regarding my aunt's husbands, the most peculiar aspect about them is their family, particularly their mother. I've only encountered this woman a few times at family gatherings organized by my aunts and at their wedding, which was a joint celebration. To be honest, I usually keep my distance from her because her family seems quite eccentric. She's the kind of person you feel like you might get roped into a Ponzi scheme if you're stuck talking to her for more than 5 minutes. The most bizarre part is that she refuses to disclose her address to her children. All they know is that she consistently arrives on flights from the same airport, and that's the extent of their knowledge about her whereabouts. Although she's still married to their father, They've lived separately outside of holiday periods since the kids turned 18 because she doesn't believe in divorce after they had a shotgun wedding at 17 due to religious reasons, and they simply don't get along. I think my aunts appreciate her because they feel they don't have to share her attention like they do with my grandparents. Her mother, the husband's grandmother, is also quite peculiar. She carries a bottle of holy water with a photo of one of the popes on it, and she sprinkles it on people. I've actively avoided her after she attempted to set me up with her unmarried nephew when I was 19. He was definitely in his early 30s, because apparently she couldn't comprehend the idea of a gay woman, especially not one with long hair who enjoys wearing dresses and makeup. On the topic of the wedding size, it seems that many have been curious about how the dogs are trained to use the bathroom on command. Well, my grandmother was a dog trainer for many years, specializing in training guide dogs and other service animals. One of the things she taught the dogs was that if you say busy, busy, they understand it as the signal that they can relieve themselves if needed. The dogs are trained to relieve themselves on command, but in our city, we have designated spots along our usual walking route where they can go. When we pass these spots, we give them the signal, and they understand that it's okay to use the bathroom if they need to. My grandmother has trained all the dogs in our family to do this, so it's a normal routine for us. Now for the update. Things took an unexpected turn. After the Christmas Day dispute, everything eventually settled down. Initially, my aunts bombarded me with abusive text messages and phone calls after I uninvited them to the wedding. However, my mother intervened and insisted that any communication should go through her. Given my aunt's fear of my mother, the harassment stopped. Surprisingly, they didn't vent their frustrations on Facebook, which is usually their go-to platform. The rest of the Christmas and New Year's celebrations were enjoyable, and the only headaches we had at our annual New Year's family lunch were from overindulging in alcohol the night before, not from screaming children. Both my partner and I had time off work over the Christmas break, as did my parents, so we dedicated those days to furthering our wedding plans. My partner is a meticulous lawyer who loves working with spreadsheets. My mother is a financial advisor, and my mother-in-law is a wedding planner. Between them, they have handled around 65% of the planning already, leaving me to handle the more enjoyable aspects. To be honest, I lack the patience and expertise for the extensive budget meetings they've already conducted. However, after New Year's, we realized that my aunts didn't take kindly to being disinvited from the wedding and were not as chastised by the family as we had hoped. Then things took an unexpected turn last Wednesday when I received an unusual call from my partner while I was at work. We rarely call each other during work hours due to our jobs. It turned out that my aunts had attempted to contact our wedding venue that morning, with one of them claiming to be me. It seems they were unaware that the venue is owned by my soon-to-be in-laws, but my mother-in-law made sure they understood this fact. After their failed attempt, they drove to our old apartment building, unaware that we had moved before Christmas. The aunt's insistence that we still lived there led to their arrest for trespassing. To cover for us, they asked the doorman to lie. My partner had lived in the building for 8 years and still had friends there, including the doorman who informed her about the incident. By the time I returned from work, my entire family was aware of the events, and they were all cautioned not to share our new address under any circumstances. If they had any contact with the aunts and my name was mentioned, they were to notify my partner immediately if anything suspicious arose. This directive was also extended to our friends, dog sitters, and residents association. Even my great-grandmother found the situation amusing, remarking, and here I thought life would be boring at 99. The aunts contacted my grandparents to bail them out, but fortunately, my grandparents did not yield to their demands as they usually would. While I love my grandparents, they have always been lenient with my aunts throughout their lives. However, it seems that over the past few weeks, they have come to realize that their actions as parents have also impacted their grandchildren. My grandparents were very strict with my mom and her brother, who they had as teenagers, while my aunts, who were in their early 30s, could do no wrong in their eyes. According to stories from my mom, there was nothing my aunts could do to get disciplined by my grandparents to their faces. Even when one of them got a tattoo at 15 and the other got caught drinking underage, my grandparents would complain about them to other people but would never say anything directly to them. A lot of my mother's family didn't live close by, so there was no one with an outside perspective that really saw how bad it was, especially as they hit the teenage years. By that point, My mom and her brother were both well out of the house living their own lives, and it was only when my aunts were older that we had some family, such as my great-grandparents, but by that point there wasn't much they could do. Now, unfortunately, onto this recent Tuesday where I got called out on my lunch break by my boss who informed me the tires on my car had been slashed and a letter on the front of my car with flyers with all anti-gay stuff on the windscreen. Apparently this time it wasn't the aunts but their mother-in-law who did it and was arrested, while at the same time my aunts went to my grandparents' house to confront them. I'll summarize all that was said, but their anger was not so much directed to my grandparents directly, but more so about how my grandparents apparently took my side over theirs. According to my aunts, my grandparents should always back them over me because as their granddaughter I was lower in the familial hierarchy, whatever that's supposed to mean. Then the usual homophobic stuff came up, and apparently they claimed my late great-grandfather would have never approved of my life choices and it was disgraceful that their inheritance is going towards my wedding dress. Contextually, my great-grandfather and I share the same birthday, with a 75-year gap between us. I was named after him, and a portion of the inheritance he left when he passed away 13 years ago was allocated to a fund established for me at birth. This fund was intended to cover expenses like education and other needs, including my current requirement for a wedding dress and new tires. Although not extremely wealthy, he had built a successful business in Ireland, which he sold to an overseas competitor in the late 70s. This allowed him and my grandmother to join his siblings in the US and Canada, where they set up an even more prosperous business, which was sold in the 90s. The remaining inheritance is managed by my great-grandmother for her care and home upkeep until her passing, after which it falls under the control of my grandparents. Unbeknownst to my aunts, my great-grandmother overheard their conversation from the next room. She is distinctly different from my grandparents and does not tolerate nonsense. Upon hearing their disrespectful remarks, she confronted them and made it clear that she was cutting them out of the inheritance because of their self-centered behavior. This revelation silenced them and caused my grandparents to see the true nature of their daughters. My parents have often joked that my aunts only contact my grandparents when they want something, and it seems that their jokes were accurate. My great-grandmother is serious about removing them from the will. She has already met with her lawyer to discuss making the necessary changes. At this point, I'm torn between finding the situation absurd and feeling overwhelmed by the stress it has brought. It's unbelievable that a comment about entitled children causing a scene at a wedding has led me to consider pursuing harassment charges and has disrupted my grandparents' vision of their family. My parents and partner have been incredibly supportive, and I'm grateful for their unwavering backing. I also appreciate everyone who has reached out with comments and messages, reassuring me that I'm not alone in this. While I knew something like this might happen eventually, I never imagined it would become so chaotic. How do you like the story, my friend? Write your opinion in the comments. Let's get 1,000 subscribers on this channel together. Love you.